Dad called me stupid for cutting my hair, then ignored me when I fainted at school. I finally cut him off, and now he's desperate for control. Okay, so before I dive into the worst year of my life, I need to explain something that probably sounds insane to most people. My dad? He had this absolutely insane obsession with long hair. And I'm not talking about just thinking it looked nice. This was a whole thing. Growing up, my dad would constantly talk about how long hair on women was a sign of beauty, virtue, and basically everything that mattered. He had this massive portrait of his mother hanging in our living room. I mean, enormous, and her hair literally dragged on the floor in it. He'd bring guests over and literally point to it like it was the Mona Lisa or something. It wasn't weird at all, right? My mom's name is Rachel. She had waist-length hair when she married my dad. And I'm not exaggerating when I say he was obsessed with it. He'd make her keep it a certain way, monitor how she washed it, everything. As for my younger sister Emily, same thing. By the time she was a teenager, her hair went all the way down to the floor. And me? Well, I was apparently his special project. When I was little, my dad would brush my hair for an hour every single night. And I mean every night. He'd sit me down between his knees, and he'd go through every single strand looking for knots or split ends. If he found one, even one, he'd ask me questions like I'd committed a crime. Why didn't you brush this morning? Did you let it drag during school? Are you not using enough conditioner? And he wouldn't stop asking until I gave him an answer he approved of. He told me that cutting hair was basically a sin. He said hair was a woman's greatest beauty, her glory, her worth. He was dead serious. We used this super expensive shampoo. I think it was like $40 a bottle, and we'd use it every single day. Hours were spent detangling it while he supervised, making sure we weren't ripping out too many strands. Looking back, it sounds absolutely insane. But as a kid, you don't know any better. My mom struggled with migraines. Bad ones. But she couldn't even drive properly because her hair would get stuck in the seatbelt and the gear shift. My dad's response? What's the point of having beautiful hair if you're going to hide it like you're ashamed? Like that made any sense. I was 9 years old. 9. And I was tired. I was tired of tripping over my hair. I was tired of spending hours getting it done. I was tired of the weight of it pulling on my head. So one night, around 9 o'clock, I snuck into the bathroom and grabbed my mom's sewing scissors. I cut about 5 inches off. 5 inches. Honestly, I thought my dad wouldn't even care. It was just my hair, right? But when he came to brush my hair that night and saw what I'd done, he just broke down. And weirdly, that was worse than if he'd yelled. He didn't yell at first. He just said, very quietly, "You've destroyed something precious that can never be replaced." Then he left the house and came back with a full-length wig. Not a regular wig. This thing was over 2.5 feet long, longer than my actual hair by a lot. He told me I had to wear it every single day until my hair grew back to what it was. That wig was a nightmare. It was heavy. It gave me neck pain. I got migraines from wearing it. I kept tripping over the extra length. And the kids at school? They absolutely destroyed me for it. They called me names. They laughed. I sobbed at home about it, and my dad's response was, "Good. Maybe now you'll understand why you should appreciate your real hair." I wore that wig for 18 months. 18. And from that day on, I never cut my hair again, because I didn't want to deal with that punishment ever again. Fast forward a few years. Emily is now 14. She's got this gorgeous, incredibly long hair that goes down to her waist. No, past her waist. And my dad built this swing set in our backyard. My mom thought it wasn't safe, but my dad wanted us out getting fresh air, enjoying nature with our hair blowing like in the shampoo commercials. Those were his exact words. One afternoon, Emily's on the swing, hair flying everywhere, having a good time. And then I hear her scream. This scream that I'll never forget. I ran outside and saw her swinging had come down in a weird way. Her hair, all that long, beautiful hair, got wrapped around the chain. Not just wrapped, twisted. She was choking. There was blood running down her neck. When I got closer, I could see there was literally a flap of scalp hanging from her head, and her hair was still caught in the chain. My dad comes running out to help, and the first thing he does, I'm not kidding, the first thing he does is look at all that hair caught in the chain. He didn't run to help Emily right away. He was looking at the hair like it was the tragedy. My mom had to physically push him out of the way to free Emily. She got her down, and the bleeding wouldn't stop. We had to call an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctors told my dad that Emily's head needed to be shaved so they could treat the scalp wound properly. Do you know what my dad did? He sat there looking like someone had turned off all the lights inside him. He was literally weighing his daughter's medical care against keeping her hair. The doctors shaved Emily's head. She had to wear a wig while it healed. And when we got home, my dad basically ignored her. He'd only pay attention if she was wearing the wig perfectly. If it shifted even slightly, he'd leave the room. Emily had nightmares about the accident. She'd wake up crying, and my dad would tell her she was being dramatic, that beauty requires sacrifice. He said that about a kid who almost died. Around the same time as Emily's accident, I started feeling off. Really off. My hair was so heavy, and I know this sounds dramatic, but it genuinely felt like someone was constantly pulling on my skull. I'd fall asleep at my desk in class. I'd trip over my hair while running in gym and literally faceplant on the track. I was exhausted all the time, but also there was more going on. I'd sleep for 16 hours and still wake up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My legs and arms felt heavy. My whole body felt wrong. I'd wake up covered in bruises. Bruises I didn't remember getting. And one morning after my dad was brushing my hair, my gums started bleeding everywhere. My mom wanted to take me to the doctor. She was genuinely worried. But my dad said I just needed vitamins and more sleep. He said I was being lazy, that lots of women had long hair and they didn't complain. And then one day I'm walking to the cafeteria at school and everything just goes black. I woke up on the floor with the school nurse looking down at me and kids standing around me looking scared. They called an ambulance and I got taken to the hospital. The doctors ran test after test. They did blood work, imaging, everything. And then this doctor came in and told me and my parents that I had leukemia, full-blown leukemia, and I needed to start chemotherapy immediately or I was going to die. She also said something that I'll never forget. Her hair will need to go. I looked at my dad when the doctor said that, and I watched his face. This is the moment I'll never forget for as long as I live. He literally sat there weighing my life versus my hair. I could see it happening in real time. The silence in that room was so loud I could hear the wall clock ticking. My dad's jaw was moving like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. He looked at me, then at the doctor, then back at me. And then he actually said this. He asked for a second opinion because this doctor doesn't understand our family values. He suggested there might be ways to do chemotherapy without cutting my hair. The doctor, I could see her patience just evaporate. She told him that my white blood cell count was critically low, that every single minute we delayed treatment, I was at risk of dying. The cancer was spreading fast. My mom, Rachel, she literally choked and grabbed the exam table. I thought she was finally going to stand up to him, but the doctor asked my dad to leave the room. She said she needed to talk to me and my mom alone. When he left, my mom started crying. But then this woman came in. Her name was Claire, and she worked for the hospital's social services. And she explained something that changed everything. The hospital could protect me from my dad's interference. They could override his parental rights when it came to life-saving medical treatment. Claire asked my mom privately if she would authorize my chemotherapy and my hair to be cut. My mom was shaking. She kept looking at the door like she was afraid my dad would break through it. But then she said yes. She said yes, please save her daughter. Claire filed a report with Child Protective Services right there, saying my dad was committing medical negligence by refusing me treatment. She also helped my mom understand that his control was abuse. I don't know how to describe the feeling of relief and terror at the same time. Relief that someone was finally going to make him let me get treatment. Terror because I absolutely knew, that my dad was going to lose his mind when he found out. I got admitted that night. They got me set up, got my 4 in, and started the chemotherapy. That first night was rough. The side effects hit hard. But I remember my mom being there, sitting in a chair by the window and just being present. A few hours later, my dad showed up with a lawyer. He was screaming about parental rights and demanding papers. He threatened to sue the hospital. The hospital administrator basically told him that my mom's decision was valid and that if he interfered with my treatment, they'd get a restraining order. The chemotherapy started that night at 8 p.m. The next morning, this woman named Violet came in. She was from Child Protective Services, and she needed to ask me questions about life at home. I started talking, and I just couldn't stop. It all came out. The hours of hairbrushing. The way my dad would interrogate me about every tangle. The wig punishment when I was 9. Emily's scalp injury, and how my dad just stared at the hair in the chain. Everything. Violet was writing everything down, and my mom was in the corner crying while I was talking. When my doctor, Dr. Martin, came in while I was still talking, she sat down with Violet and explained that my symptoms, the fatigue, the bruises, the bleeding gums, these were all obvious signs that something was seriously wrong. She said any reasonable parent would have taken me to a doctor weeks ago. She said my dad's refusal to get me medical care because he was afraid a doctor would cut my hair met the legal definition of child endangerment. Dr. Martin then said something that hit me hard. Without treatment, she would have died within weeks. The room went silent. My dad was still trying to fight it. He went to a lawyer. He talked about his parental rights and religious freedom, which was hilarious because we were never even religious. But the hospital stood firm. On day 3 of my treatment, my doctor told me I needed to have my head shaved before the chemotherapy caused my hair to fall out in patches. She said it would be less traumatic to do it on our terms. Even though I'd been preparing for this my whole life, every time my dad touched my hair and talked about it being my only value, I'd imagined life without it. Actually hearing it made me feel sick. But I was also weirdly ready. Like the weight was finally going to lift. My mom sat with me while this nurse named Hannah came in with clippers. She wrapped a cape around my shoulders and turned them on. And as she buzzed away all that hair, it was like someone lifted something off me that I didn't even realize I was carrying. The buzzing, the hair falling away, my scalp feeling the air for the first time in my entire life. When she showed me the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My head looked small. My ears, my scalp, everything was visible in a way it had never been. But my mom looked at me and started crying and told me I was gorgeous. And I think she actually meant it for the first time ever. Within hours, my dad found out. Security stopped him at the elevator because he came to the hospital screaming about me being damaged, about us destroying something irreplaceable. He was ranting about family legacy and his mother and grandmother rolling in their graves. His voice echoed down the hallway while I was in my room, terrified. That night, Claire came back with legal documents. My dad had gotten a protective order against him. He couldn't visit. He couldn't contact us. My mom had full medical decision-making power. That was the same night my mom finally signed her first legal document against my dad after 18 years of marriage. The second night I was in the hospital, everything escalated. My dad showed up in the lobby demanding to see me and my mom. Security told me later that he was yelling about his rights, waving court documents around. When they told him he couldn't come upstairs without supervision, he tried to push past the desk. 2 security guards had to stop him from getting to the elevators. He was screaming, "This is my hospital. Nobody can take my daughter." One of the police officers who responded came to my room and told us that my dad was still sitting in his car in the parking lot, just staring at the building, watching us. They asked if we wanted a restraining order. My mom said the court order was enough, but I could see her hands shaking as she said it. On day 3 of my hospitalization, Violet came back. She was the CPS caseworker, and she asked my mom a question that made her face go pale. "Is Emily safe at home with Gregory?" My mom looked sick. She realized Emily was still there, in that house, with my dad. And we didn't have time to make other plans because everything happened so fast. My mom started panicking. Violet said CPS needed to do a welfare check at the house that afternoon if possible. I felt this dread wash over me because I absolutely knew, how my dad would react when investigators showed up at our door. I told Violet to please check on Emily. Violet promised she'd make sure it happened that day and that someone would contact us. After Violet left, my mom just sat in the window chair staring at her phone like she could make it ring faster through sheer willpower. We didn't talk. We just waited. Around 4 p.m., Violet called. My mom put her on speaker so I could hear. Violet said Emily was physically safe, but she seemed afraid and my dad had been dominating the entire interview. The investigator had videotaped everything, and that's when Violet described what she found. There was an entire bathroom cabinet filled with those $40 shampoos and conditioners and hair treatments. More bottles than actual food in some rooms. But the worst part was my dad's desk. He had this diary, this detailed log, where he documented mine and Emily's hair development like we were lab experiments. He had measurements, texture notes, length calculations, dates and times, going back for years. Violet said they organized a follow-up interview at Emily's school the next day without my dad present so Emily could talk freely. And she was adding everything to the CPS file. I remember feeling this sick sensation. My dad had been documenting us like we were science projects, like our hair was his research subject. The next day, a lawyer named Jack Hudson came to see us. He was gentle, had this bag full of paperwork, and he explained what he could do. He said he was going to file for emergency custody of me and Emily. He explained all the legal terms, petitioner, respondent, interim orders. But basically it meant my mom could get legal authority to keep us away from my dad while the court decided what would happen long term. Jack said, "Your husband's refusal to seek medical care, his controlling behavior, and what happened to Emily on the swing set. These are all factors that support interim custody. We can get your children protected while this gets sorted out." My mom looked terrified, but also like someone had finally given her permission to protect us. Jack promised to start the paperwork immediately and said he'd get a court date within weeks. My first chemotherapy treatment required 9 days in the hospital, and it was weird, but I started to feel normal. Not physically normal because I was exhausted, nauseated, and completely bald, but mentally, I could actually breathe. I realized I could survive without my dad. The nurses would ask me what I wanted to eat, and I could just say something without worrying about disappointing someone. Nobody was timing me in the bathroom. Nobody was watching what I did. Nobody was inspecting me or ordering me around. For the first time in my entire life, I had autonomy over my own body. On day 6, Emily called my mom from her friend's house. Before my mom could even say hello, I could hear Emily crying on the other end. When my mom put it on speaker, Emily's voice was small and terrified. "I can't remember the last time you looked calm," Emily said. And then she said something that broke my heart. Being at a cancer hospital seems safer than being with Dad. Emily begged to stay at the hospital with us. She said my dad had gotten worse since I left. He was caressing her hair every night, telling her she was the only daughter he had left who still understood family values. She was terrified. My mom told Emily to stay at her friend's house, that they were working on getting her out, that she needed to just hold on a little longer. Emily cried more. I could hear it through the phone, and it made me feel so guilty for leaving her there. After my mom hung up, my dad started texting. A lot. He texted from multiple phone numbers because my mom had blocked his main one. The messages were terrible, calling us traitors, saying we destroyed the family, betraying ancient customs. He was using words like ungrateful and selfish. Then his relatives started reaching out. Aunts my mom hadn't talked to in years. They sent messages saying my mom was wrong, that my dad was right, that we were ruining something beautiful and important. The family was turning against us. Claire, the hospital social worker, checked on us that night. When my mom showed her all the messages, Claire got this look of controlled anger on her face. She immediately started taking screenshots of everything on her laptop, adding them to the CPS file as evidence of harassment. She helped my mom set up a new phone number that only the hospital and legal team had, a number my dad couldn't call. On day 9 of my hospitalization, I woke up feeling hot and strange, like my body was on fire. The nurse took my temperature, and her whole face changed. Suddenly there were multiple people in my room doing blood work, connecting new 4 bags, checking all my vitals. Dr. Martin diagnosed me with neutropenia, a chemo-related condition where my white blood cell count dropped dangerously low. I was moved to an isolated room at the end of the corridor, this bubble-like environment, and only my mom could visit me. No one else was allowed inside. The fever made everything feel distant and surreal, like I was watching my life happen to someone else. That night, I had these horrible nightmares about my hair growing back long and thick, and my dad was brushing it and saying it looked beautiful, and it was wrapping around my neck like it was choking me. I'd wake up gasping and immediately touch my head to make sure it was still bald, still free, still mine. My mom refused to leave. The nurses kept telling her she needed to rest and sleep, but she wouldn't go. When I woke up at 3 a.m., she was sitting in the chair next to my bed watching me breathe. Her eyes were red from crying. When she saw I was awake, she told me she'd been thinking about all the years she wasted on her hair. All those hours washing, conditioning, drying, brushing every single day. Hours she could have worked, could have saved money, could have built a life to escape. She said staying with my dad made her complicit. She blamed herself. I told her it wasn't her fault, that my dad was responsible for his own behavior. But she just shook her head. She said she should have left sooner, should have protected us sooner. After 36 hours, my fever finally came down. I felt normal again physically, but emotionally I was wrecked. Claire came and sat with my mom that day. She asked about money, bank accounts, if my mom had any financial independence at all. My mom said no. My dad controlled everything. She had no credit card, no checking account, nothing. Claire nodded, like she'd heard this story 100 times before. She pulled out these pamphlets about a domestic abuse program, one that helps women become financially independent, get job training, build a safety plan. My mom took notes like she was studying for the most important test of her life. She wrote down phone numbers, websites, Claire's direct contact information. Jack submitted the emergency custody petition to family court the next morning. The clerk scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks out. 2 days later, the process server found my dad at work and served him with the court papers. Apparently, he went completely white and had to sit down. Just sat there reading them in shock. That evening, hospital security called upstairs and said my dad was in the lobby again. This time he had court documents and was demanding to see me and my mom. He was yelling about his rights, flashing the papers around. When security told him he couldn't come up without supervision, he tried to push past the desk again. This time, 2 more security personnel blocked the elevators. My dad was screaming, "This is my hospital. Nobody can take my daughter." The police showed up. They talked to him, got a report, and told my mom they'd be monitoring the situation. One officer came to my room and told us that my dad was still sitting in the parking lot in his car, just sitting there, staring at the hospital building. My mom and I looked at each other. I was nauseous because I could picture my dad's face when things didn't go his way. He'd never been told no before. Not really. And now everything was falling apart, and he couldn't understand why nobody else saw things his way. 3 days later, Emily's school nurse called my mom at lunch. My dad had tried to pick Emily up from class, claiming it was a family emergency and that my mom had sent him to get her. The school secretary asked to confirm with my mom first. My dad lost it. He screamed that he didn't need permission, that he was her father, that the school was conspiring against him and holding his daughter captive. The principal had to leave her office to deal with him. She told him he couldn't leave with Emily without parental authorization. My dad said, "Go ahead and call the police because I'm not leaving without my daughter." The police did show up. While my dad was arguing with the office secretary, Emily heard him yelling from her classroom down the hallway. She was terrified. My mom called Violet immediately. Violet said she was pursuing an emergency removal order. She said Emily was no longer safe in that home. That afternoon, Emily's social worker pulled her out of class during the last period. Emily never went home to pack, never got her stuff. She was brought straight to the hospital. When Emily walked into my hospital room around 4 p.m., she just stopped in the doorway. She stared at my bald head like she couldn't process what she was seeing. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there with her bag on her shoulder and all that floor-length hair spilling around her feet. Then her face crumpled and she started sobbing. Heavy, breathless, body-shaking sobs. She dropped her backpack and ran to me, clutching me and wailing into my shoulder like her heart was breaking. When she could finally talk, she looked at my mom and said she wanted to cut her hair too. She said it was too heavy. It was too much work. It didn't matter what my dad thought anymore. Her voice was shaky but furious, like she'd been holding this in forever and finally had permission to say it. My mom's face went through like 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. I could see her wrestling between her fear of how my dad would react and her new commitment to protect us. She took a deep breath and promised Emily that nobody would ever force us to keep hair we didn't want. She said, "We're going to figure this out together." An hour later, the CPS social worker came back with paperwork. Emily was placed in temporary protective custody with my mom as our guardian. We were all going to stay at the hospital until safe housing could be arranged. The social worker said she'd arranged for someone to go to the house with police to get Emily's clothes and school materials while my dad was at work. That night, after the nurses finished their rounds and turned off most of the lights, Emily and I whispered about all those years of my dad's hair brushing and hair examinations. We talked about his rage over split ends. We talked about learning to move carefully so our hair wouldn't get stuck in things. Emily described her nightmares about the swing set accident, waking up with the chain dragging across her scalp. For the first time ever, we could talk about this without my dad overhearing and telling us we were ungrateful. The next morning, Emily wanted to cut her hair. My mom was trembling with anxiety. I could see her hands shaking. But she asked the nurse if it was possible. Hannah, the same nurse who'd shaved my head, came in with scissors and a comb. Emily sat by the window. She told Hannah, shoulder length, "Just lose all the weight." Hannah started cutting. Big pieces of hair fell to the floor in thick ropes. Emily watched in the mirror as her hair got shorter and shorter. When Hannah finished, Emily ran her fingers through her hair for what I think was the first time ever. No knots, no weight, just her. She looked in the mirror, and this expression of shock and joy crossed her face. She laughed, this surprised, almost delighted laugh. My mom sobbed, not from fear this time. She was crying joyfully and mournfully at the same time, like she was mourning all the years we'd lost and rejoicing in our liberation all at once. The nurse picked up all of Emily's hair off the floor and asked if we wanted any of it. Emily said no immediately. We didn't need any reminders of that weight. The next morning, Dr. Stevens came by during rounds and said I could be discharged. But then she paused and looked at my mom and said, "Of course, we can't actually send you home because of the protective order." My mom grimaced because she hadn't thought that far ahead. We had nowhere to go. Dr. Stevens worked with hospital social services. By that afternoon, Claire had information about a crisis family housing program. She suggested we could stay in a modest 2-bedroom furnished apartment near the hospital for 3 months while my mom got back on her feet and we found permanent housing. The apartment was part of a domestic abuse victim program, and a subsidy would cover the rent. Claire helped my mom apply right there in my hospital room. 2 days later, we got approval to move in whenever we were ready. On Saturday morning, we packed up the few things we had and moved into that little apartment. We only had the bags of clothes that Claire had helped my mom pack during a supervised visit to the house while my dad was at work. A police officer had actually prevented my dad from coming home early during that visit. My mom said it was the strangest feeling walking through her own house like a stranger, taking only what she needed and leaving everything else behind. The apartment was tiny and rundown, third floor of an old building, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a lock that my dad couldn't open. But that night, we ordered pizza and ate on the living room floor. Emily said this was our first real home, and she was absolutely right. Our old house had been like my dad's hair museum, a monument to his obsession. This little apartment, this was ours. It was terrifying for my mom to start a job training program through the domestic violence services. She hadn't worked since before I was born. She didn't know Excel or email. But the program was specifically for women like her, women who'd been trapped in abusive marriages and out of the workforce for years. The instructors helped her highlight her humanitarian work and even my dad's accounting skills on her resume. They rehearsed interviews with her until she could answer questions without shaking. 2 weeks into the training, the teacher told her about a remote part-time data entry job at a medical billing company. My mom applied. 3 days later, she got hired. $12 an hour, but it was money she controlled. Money my dad couldn't access. Money that was hers. Claire suggested I keep a diary. I didn't know what to write at first, but once I started, it all poured out. I wrote about years of weekly hairbrushing and my dad checking every inch for damage. I wrote about the heavy wig punishment when I was 9 and how kids taunted me. I described Emily's swing set accident, the blood, my dad's reaction. I wrote about my fatigue and my dad calling me lazy. I wrote about my cancer diagnosis, shaving my head, and this strange feeling of liberation mixed with terror. Some days I wrote angry entries. Sometimes I wrote about being terrified that the cancer would kill me, and all of this would be for nothing. But Claire said both were legitimate. She said to write whatever came to mind. The diary became this space where I could process everything that had happened. And most importantly, it became proof, evidence of what we'd endured. The custody hearing was 3 weeks away. Jack came to our apartment with a folder of papers. He explained what was going to happen, what to expect, and what my testimony needed to cover. But he also warned us that family court was unpredictable. He said, "The judge might order visits, even if your mom gets custody. Family law is complicated, and psychological control and medical negligence are harder to prove than physical abuse." My stomach dropped when he said that. The thought of my dad having any access to us made me want to throw up. Jack had me practice my statement over and over. He said showing emotion was okay. Actually, he said it was necessary. The judge needed to understand how this affected me. He videotaped me reading it on my mom's phone so I could see how I looked and sounded. The first time I read it out loud without breaking down completely, my voice was shaking so hard I could barely recognize myself. The night before the hearing, I could barely sleep. I kept having these dreams where my hair grew back super long and my dad was brushing it, and it was wrapping around my neck like it was choking me. I woke up gasping, reaching for my head to make sure it was still bald. My heart was racing. My mom heard me and came and sat with me until I fell asleep again. The hearing was at 9 a.m. The courtroom smelled like old wood and something else, something I can only describe as years and years of people's pain soaking into the walls. When we walked in, my dad was already there with his lawyer. He was wearing a suit. His hair was perfectly combed. He looked like a respectable father who'd been wronged by the system. Looking at him made my skin crawl. The judge had gray hair, glasses, probably in her 50s. She explained that the hearing would determine temporary custody and medical decision-making while the CPS investigation happened. She'd decide what was best for me and Emily based on the evidence and testimony. Jack presented our case first. He started with my cancer diagnosis and my dad's interference with my treatment. I tried to read the judge's face to see if she was moved by any of it, but she looked completely neutral the whole time. Violet testified first. She talked about the photos she took at our house, my dad's grandmother's portrait on the wall, the bathroom cabinet absolutely packed with those $40 shampoos and hair treatments. Then she described the notebook, my dad's notebook. He'd been documenting mine and Emily's hair development like we were science experiments. He had measurements, texture notes, length calculations, every single month for years, written down in this creepy log. The judge examined every photo, every single one, and I could see her expression shifting. It was subtle, but it shifted. Violet described Emily's scalp injury in detail. How my dad just stared at the hair caught in the chain while Emily was bleeding and screaming. How he asked her about her hair while she was crying. The judge's jaw got tighter. Then my doctor testified via video. Dr. Martin appeared on this huge screen in the courtroom, and she talked about my leukemia diagnosis. She explained that psychological abuse is actually harder to detect and harder to prove than physical abuse, but it can be more damaging. She went through my symptoms, the fatigue, the bruising, the bleeding gums, and said any reasonable parent would have taken me to a doctor weeks before I collapsed. She told the court that my dad's refusal to get me medical help because he was afraid a doctor would cut my hair met the legal definition of child endangerment. She said the delay may have killed her. The judge wrote that down. She wrote faster when Dr. Martin said those words. Then Jack called my mom to the witness stand, and when she started talking about her marriage, her voice started quiet but got louder as she talked. She described how my dad controlled what she wore, how she wore her hair, where she could go. She talked about being isolated from friends and family for 18 years. She described those 3 or 4 hour overnight hairbrushing sessions where my dad would inspect every inch of her hair for split ends. She told the judge she didn't have her own bank account, no credit card. She wasn't on the mortgage or the car titles. She had nothing. She said, I should have protected my children sooner, but I'm protecting them now, and I will never let him control us again. The judge took notes and asked her specific questions about different incidents. When Jack was done, my mom came back and sat next to me. Her hands were shaking. Then it was my dad's lawyer's turn. He argued that my dad came from a cultural background that valued long hair on women, and that religious freedom protected his beliefs. He said my dad never meant to hurt anyone. He submitted photos of my dad's mother and grandmother with ankle-length hair, trying to frame it as cultural heritage instead of abuse. My dad got on the stand and talked about preserving generations-old family customs. He talked about his grandmother and his mother like they were saints. He said hair was holy. He claimed the cancer diagnosis was shocking and he needed time to process it before deciding on treatment. But then the judge asked him directly, "Were you so concerned about your daughter's hair that you avoided getting her medical care?" There was this long silence. My dad looked at his lawyer. His lawyer nodded slightly, and my dad admitted it. He said he was afraid a doctor would cut my hair. The courtroom went completely silent. You could hear the clock ticking. The judge started writing fast, really fast. Jack didn't even need to question me directly after that. The judge looked like she'd heard enough. Jack read my statement out loud to the court about the brushing sessions, the wig punishment, Emily's accident, how I felt fatigued and sick while my dad called me lazy, how I was terrified the cancer would kill me because he waited so long. When the judge read her ruling, she stared right at my dad. She gave my mom full temporary custody of me and Emily. She gave my mom sole medical decision-making power. My dad got supervised visits only 2 hours a week with a trained monitor present, and the judge ordered him into therapy specifically for controlling behavior. She said, "The respondent will participate in parenting classes and psychological evaluation to determine if supervised contact can continue or should be terminated." My dad sat like someone had just told him someone died. His lawyer was whispering in his ear, holding his arm. My dad didn't say anything. He didn't yell. He just looked empty. We left through a side exit to avoid him. Jack walked us to my mom's car and told her to document everything for the permanent custody hearing in 7 months. He gave her his card and said to call immediately if my dad tried to contact us or violate the order. In the car, my mom just sat there crying for a while. She didn't drive right away. She just sat there and cried. Emily and I didn't know what to say. We'd won, but it didn't feel real yet. That night, we went back to our tiny apartment and my mom made spaghetti. Emily and I did homework at the little kitchen table. It sounds so normal, so boring, but it felt revolutionary. Nobody was timing us. Nobody was watching. Nobody was regulating what we did or how long we took. We could just exist. While my mom was looking at her phone, my dad's number came up. She didn't answer. She showed me the call log and texted it to Jack like he'd instructed. A few minutes later, he called again. She declined again. Managing boundaries was harder than I thought it would be. Part of me felt guilty for not answering. 2 weeks after the hearing, my mom came home from work absolutely glowing. The medical billing company had offered her a full-time position with benefits. She was making enough money to get us into a real apartment. Not a shelter, not a temporary place, a real home with a lease. That weekend, my mom showed me and Emily apartments on her laptop. We had actual input on where we lived. Emily wanted a balcony. I wanted to be near the hospital bus route because I still had chemotherapy every other week. My mom promised to find a place that worked for everyone. 2 weeks later, we were signing a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment with a little balcony and easy access to the bus. My second round of chemotherapy came around, and I wasn't nearly as scared. The nurses knew me by then. My chart got to me faster. Dr. Martin sat across from me and told me my cancer was responding better than expected. My blood levels were improving. She said I'd need about 7 months of treatment, maybe longer, but things were looking good. I remember walking past the mirror in the hospital hallway and barely recognizing myself. I was completely bald with just a tiny bit of stubble coming in. My face looked smaller. There were dark circles under my eyes that made me look older. But honestly, without all that hair, I looked more like myself than I ever had. A week after my second treatment, I got invited to a teen cancer support group at the hospital. I was nervous about it, but the group leader, Hannah, who'd actually been a cancer patient herself and now had short hair that was growing back, made everyone feel comfortable. There were 8 of us in a circle. Some had scarves. Some had hats. Some, like me, were just bald. A girl named Sarah talked about how cancer actually saved her life in a weird way. She said before she got sick, her parents had her whole life planned out. Ballet, piano, straight A's, perfect college. Cancer made her realize she didn't want any of that. She figured out who she actually was instead of who everyone wanted her to be. Sarah and I talked for like 20 minutes after the meeting. She gave me her number and told me to text her whenever I needed someone who understood. I finally had a friend who got it. My mom started going to a domestic violence support group on Tuesday nights. She came home exhausted but lighter every time. She said the group helped her see patterns, how my dad had isolated her from friends and family, controlled her money, made her feel like she needed him to survive. She was putting the pieces together about how toxic everything had been. Emily started seeing a therapist through the domestic violence program. Dr. Carter explained to her that what my dad did to our family was psychological abuse. He said the swing set accident should have triggered a CPS investigation years ago, and that teachers and doctors should have been reporting what they were seeing. One day, about 3 months after the hearing, I heard the bathroom door close and this weird cutting sound. Scissors going through something thick. I got out of bed and went to check on my mom. When she came out of the bathroom, her hair was cut to shoulder length. Her hands were shaking, but she was smiling. She looked terrified and lighter at the same time. She said, "I can't carry this weight anymore." My mom explained that seeing me go through chemo and Emily cut her own hair made her realize she was still letting my dad control her even though he wasn't there. She'd spent the last 18 years, half her adult life, maintaining her hair like it was the most important thing she owned. She'd used it as her identity, and now, looking at her daughters free and alive, she realized her hair had been a chain, not a crown. Emily and I helped her even out the edges with scissors. We all cried, but it was different crying than before. It was the kind of crying that means something heavy finally fell off. We took a trash bag and cleaned up all the hair. My mom personally carried it to the dumpster outside, like she was physically throwing away the last piece of her old life. 6 months after the hearing, I finished my cancer treatment. My hair had grown back and soft and healthy. Emily's bob haircut was growing out, but she loved it. She was making friends at school now, kids who'd never known her as the girl with floor-length hair who couldn't run or play sports. My mom got her college degree while working full-time. She's still at the medical billing company, but now she's training for a supervisor position. She opens her own mail. She has her own bank account. She makes her own decisions without asking permission or checking with anyone. My dad still gets his supervised visits every Wednesday night. He sits mostly silent while the monitor takes notes. After the court ruling, he stopped trying to control us. He's not trying to connect with us or understand his mistakes. He just exists in this quiet space where he's lost everything that mattered to him. Not because we took it, but because he chose his obsession over his children. Last week, my mom took a photo of all of us standing in front of our apartment building. In the photo, my mom's got wind-blown shoulder-length hair. Emily's got that cute short haircut she loves. And I've got my hair grown back in, but short and healthy-looking. We're not perfect. We're not cured. Some days are still hard. I have anxiety about authority figures. My mom still flinches sometimes when she hears a man's voice. Emily still has nightmares about the swing set. We're all in therapy, but we're comfortable. We're safe. We're free. And for the first time in our entire lives, our bodies belong to us. Not to someone else's idea of beauty. Not to someone else's obsession. Not to control that masqueraded as love. That's what real freedom feels like. And I wouldn't trade it for all the long hair in the world.